And good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us on Monday, June 13th. This is a special call meeting of the Cumberland County Board of Commissioners. Call it to order and welcome everybody. This is a remote meeting, and I think we have Commissioner Jemb Keith is the only one that's with us by remote. Good afternoon, Commissioner Keith. We have Commissioner Lancaster, Commissioner Council, Vice Chairwoman Stewart, and Commissioner Evans. He'll be here in just a moment. And Commissioner Stewart, if you could do the invocation and the pledge for us.
God, we thank you for this day. We thank you, God, for the opportunity to come here, God, so that we can do the work of the citizens of Cumberland County. I pray that you give each and every commissioner wisdom and guidance as we proceed, God. I pray, God, that there will be peace. I pray that we will have understanding the way that you see fit. In Jesus' name, amen. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, that will take us to our first item of business on the agenda. And we want to thank you for bringing this to our attention. This is keeping us straight. I tell you what, that's why you got good finance people. We're going to take care of all of you all. And the staff. This was one that I think has thrown the whole state for a loop with this Senate bill that deals with nonprofits. And so we did an item on our budget that I sit on as the one of the board members, actually I'm the chair. It's Second Harvest, but Second Harvest comes up on the action pathways, which was community action program. And I sit as a representative of this board. But just to be on the safe side, because we're not quite sure, we just gonna make sure I don't go to jail. Because that's what that's got. Y'all think y'all laughing? That's what that's. Oh my gracious! So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the vice chairwoman, who will conduct this part of it. Because I think when we get to the amendment, because of that, I will recuse myself. So and not be able to take into any of that. So, Commissioner Stewart.
Madam Manager.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. And so I emailed out the Amendment 1 and Amendment 2, and the amendments are also placed at your seat. The first amendment is to remove we need a motion and a vote to remove $12,750 from the budget ordinance that was approved on June 6th. That's the funding for Second Harvest Food Bank.
Okay, that's my motion.
Second.
It's been motion and second to remove $12,750 from community funding for Second Harvest. If we could identify ourselves.
Yeah.
Larry, yes. Lancaster.
Yes.
Commissioner Council. Your vote, please.
Yes.
Commissioner Stewart.
Yes.
Commissioner
I will
Evans.
recuse myself of that issue.
Commissioner Evans.
She did. Yes, Evans. Yes. She been calling us the same thing.
Your vote, Commissioner Keith. Thank you. That is unanimous. And Commissioner Evans.
Amendment number 2, Madam Chairwoman, is to add $12,750 back to the budget for Second Harvest Food Bank.
If I can get a motion to add.
That's a motion. Add it back.
Second.
All in favor?
Your vote, Commissioner Lancaster.
Yes.
Commissioner Council. Yes.
Well,
Commissioner Stewart.
excuse me, 1 minute, I'm going to interrupt this. that is key to making motions, but we need to state the motion. Because nobody knows what you're talking about on television.
I can restate what I believe.
I withdraw my motion.
So amendment number 2 is to add $12,750 back to the budget, and this would be funding for the Second Harvest Food Bank. And that would be the information needed to craft a motion if the board chooses to put the money back in the budget.
Thank you, ma'am.
If I can get a motion to add $12,750 back to the Second Harvest Food Bank.
I move that we add $12,750 back to Second Harvest Food Bank.
If I can get a second.
Second.
Commissioner Lancaster, your vote, please.
Yes.
Commissioner Council, Commissioner Stewart,
Yes.
Commissioner Evans,
Yes.
Commissioner Keith. Thank you.
And I will recuse myself. You have to call for me. I have to put it in the minutes.
Yes.
That I will recuse.
Yes.
Yes. All right, that will take us to our second order of business, which is the Cumberland County Comprehensive Space Needs Analysis and Master Planning Update by Creech and Associates.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman and Commissioners, as you know, we have brought on Creech and Associates to take a look at our building inventory and to specifically look at space needs within multiple county facilities. We have had a general government services facility included in our capital planning model for several years, and so we're trying to follow through now with some information and some options. And so last time we had Brent from Creech and Associates. He's not able to be with us this evening, but his associate Natalie Stinger, I don't think I butchered your name, is going to provide a presentation on some of their findings and some options to consider. Natalie, please join us.
Hello all, as Amy said, my name is Natalie, I'm with Creech and Associates, and we've been working with the county since last fall on doing a space needs analysis and some first steps for master planning for how the county can begin to accomplish their space needs. Make this, so I'm going to make this full screen. So as she said, Brent was here last time. He's not able to be here today. My name is Natalie, and then I have Michael and Jim with me over there who have also worked on the project. So the agenda for today, so we'll start with some quick project introductions. We'll go over a summary of how we did the space needs analysis. Gives us our numbers that we use to do the master planning, which is really where we want to focus most of our information today. So we'll go over some summaries, and then we'll speak to a few different buildings, mostly the new government center, this building right here,
Since we have someone remote, can you try to speak into the microphone?
Yes, of course. Is this better? Okay, thank you. So like I said, we'll go over a master planning of 4 major buildings, the first one being the new General Government Services Center, the second being this building that we're in right now, the Jemb Courthouse. We'll look at the historic courthouse, and then we'll look at child support services. So again, this is just the first phase in an overall county-wide study. So we picked a select number of buildings to look at. So we looked at 11 different buildings.
Is there a reason that block, don't know where Jimmy is, but it blocks off half the screen? There we go.
I'm sorry. Thank
Can you
you.
see still though?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
If I close this, is that?
So you good now?
Thank you. Yes, so we looked at 11 buildings, 27 departments, and assessed almost 325,000 square feet for this first phase of the countywide master planning. So this is a brief list of the departments we looked at. Mainly it was departments that are currently in the Jemb Courthouse as well as the historic courthouse. Then we also looked at Board of Elections, child support, and other development services departments, as well as library administration in case we want to look at them going into the historic courthouse. So facility list, again, I went over the Jemb Courthouse as well as the historic courthouse. And then we looked at the Easter Seals facility in case we want to use that as twin space in the future, as well as a couple different suites from other buildings, mainly suites that had a connection to departments that were already in this building or one of the other facilities that we looked at. So the process, again, we were with you in February and spoke to you about some of our space needs and some of our goals for this project. We're back with you today to go over some of our findings and master planning options for you. And then we'll be back again at the end of the project, which right now is scheduled to be towards the end of August.
Do we have hard copies of this? I mean, it's just easier to be able to, sometimes these things are so far off, it's hard for everybody to see them. Are they not? Are they not?
I have, how many of you?
Yes. Yes.
It'll take just a few minutes.
Take- You can keep on going, I guess.
That's okay. So project roadmap, we just finished. So we finished the space needs, we finished the facilities conditions assessments, we've spoken with all of your department heads, and we've begun to do some conceptual designs. We went over it with the advisory committee, and we've got some cost estimates for those options, and that's what we want to share with you today and get your opinion on. And then after this meeting, we will finalize some of the deliverables, work on anything that may come out of this room, and then create a final document for this project. So overview of the initial process. So I think we met with most of you during our interviews. So I think Brent was here and spoke with you, but we also met with all of the department heads individually and heard their needs, heard their future growth, heard what worked well, what didn't work well, and incorporated that into our space needs and those numbers. And we didn't want to design a building that just fit today's needs. So we want to also think about how the county is going to grow in the future. So we looked at some growth trends for the county and how the county was growing overall and applied that to the staff as well. Because, again, we don't want to plan a building that's going to be full on day one. We want there to be room for growth for at least 20 years up to, a lot of these buildings have lifespans of 50 plus years. So I want to make sure there's room for that. And what we did here is we looked at different factors such as the U.S. Census, OSBM, and then commercial and residential permit numbers, and we looked at how those numbers have grown over the past 10 years and used those to project out 20 years, relating the county population to what services would be needed to serve that population. So the numbers we're sharing with you are numbers that would serve a population of almost 360,000 people in 2042. And again, we translated the staff or the overall population numbers to each individual department. So we said if the department or if the county overall is growing at a 0.2 to 0.4% rate, how does that compare to each of the individual departments? So some of them there was a catch-up factor, so they needed some new employees right now, and then how they would grow in the future. Some departments were more directly related to the population than others. So some like IT are growing a lot quicker as new technology and items like that evolves than some of the other departments that can stay sufficient with their current staff load, even if the population grows.
Did you take into consideration during the pandemic, people don't work at home now? Not as many people are actually going to be in the buildings.
Right.
A lot of IT people work at home now, they don't even come to the office anymore.
Right, we did look at that, and we worked with Tracy on creating a survey that we sent out to all of the department heads and tried to figure out kind of what would work in the future for if that would implicate space. So does everyone need a private office? Or if you go to a hybrid model in the future, can we work with more open offices and more cubicles, and can that be more space efficient than if everyone had private offices? And Tracy, I don't know if you have anything to share from this.
So everything that Natalie says is true, but we also have to consider that there are some positions that are not able to work remote. Let's just by department, but it was taken into consideration.
Yeah. I mean, just the pandemic's don't change the way, you don't need as much brick and mortar and square rooms as opposed to movable space.
It changes some.
Right.
I think.
Yes, thank you. So here's a summary of each department and how we have projected their growth. Overall, the county's projected to grow about 6% over the next 20 years. Our staff numbers show staff are projected to grow on average about 1% per year, a little bit less than 1% per year, in order to have that catch-up factor, plus serve the county's future population. And then once we figured out kind of, what your current needs are, what your future needs are, we put together a program of spaces needed for each department, and we use space standards for this. So we also build buildings like this regularly, so if we tell you, this office needs to be 120 square feet, we know what that means, and we know that that can function well for the various positions. So over here, you'll see some images of some of those. We have our office modules on the bottom, and then we also have space modules for items like conference rooms and chambers and all of those, so we know that these sizes work. And again, here's some office standards that we used in planning these buildings. And so I want to share some of our findings for the summaries for how much space each department needs. And to do this, we have a few definitions to share. So we look at space in three ways. We have the net assignable square footage, net usable square footage, and gross square footage. And that helps us move spaces around more easily. So net assignable is what you would think about for each individual room. So this room right here is about 500 square feet. That's the net assignable square footage. The net usable square footage assigns a circulation factor for a suite, so how much space is needed for the administration suite. So you also have to account for this corridor back here. And then you have another factor that gives us the gross square footage, and that's the whole building. So that accounts for items like the main corridors out here. You have your restrooms, your stairs, your elevators, mechanical, electrical, items like that. And when we begin master planning, we looked at items in the net usable square footage. So how much space each suite needs, and that allows us to be fluid when we're planning and move the different departments around as needed to create buildings and apply those individual building factors as needed. So,
This is a little small, they can't see all of it.
yes. So high level, if we look at growth over the next 20 years, again, just for the department suite numbers, not necessarily all of the buildings, we're looking at a 37% growth in the department suite numbers. That's what's needed right now. So if everything were right-sized right now and everyone had all the spaces, more square footage than you have right now for all of the buildings that we looked at. If we looked at all of the departments that are in this study, so those 27 departments that we listed earlier in the 11 buildings. Right now, ideally, for your current staff workload, you would have 37% more space, so about a third more space than you have right now. And a lot of that's also in the court. So if the courts had all the courtrooms that they asked for, and everyone had right-sized office spaces, right-sized storage, we're looking at around a third more square footage right now. And then if we look at future growth on top of that, we're looking at a 56% change in growth over time, over 20 years.
Commissioner Chairman, we also need to consider we have offices where 2 or 3 people are in one office. And
Right,
so-
I mean, I get that, it's the 37% estimated need, but it doesn't take into account, I guess it will at some point, I can't see those numbers. Some buildings have maybe 2. I mean, when you give me that 37% over the current use, it really doesn't hit me where it is.
And this is just for the net usable square footage, so this is all of the department suites. So spaces like the ground floor of the historic courthouse that aren't used aren't on these tables because these are our department suite numbers and how big those have to grow overall, if that helps clarify things. So then we'll get into master planning and how, and come up with some options for how to accomplish those space needs goals that we just stated. And we broke this up, and so there's two options for every building. Some of them have to go with each other, and others can kind of be picked and chosen from option 1 here, can go with option 2 here, and items like that. So first we'll go over the General Government Services Center with you, which also ties into the historic courthouse and the library. So we'll have two options to share with you for that. That will affect all three of those buildings combined. And that's going to be, is there, the new Government Services Center, are you moving everyone from administration there, or are you keeping the board spaces as well as administration, legal, and the clerk in the historic courthouse? So if those 4 departments are going into the historic courthouse, then you don't have to build more square footage for them at the new Government Services Center. But if they are not going in the courthouse, or in the historic courthouse, then you are moving them on into the new Government Services Center campus. And then the library administration could move into the historic courthouse, move their office functions in there as well as some of their archive and historic items into that building. And then they can also function to run a county museum that can occupy the other half of that building. So those are our two options for those groups of buildings. And then we looked at the Board of Elections. So one option is, are you renovating their space where they are? Second option is, are you building a new building for them somewhere in the county? And then the other buildings we looked at, and were this building, so the Jemb Courthouse.
Can we go back? I'm just kind of lost. Maybe everybody else. It is difficult, but so option 1 is what? You got general government service, you got historic courthouse, you got the court library. So is option 1 taking everything to the historic courthouse, or everything to general government services building? I can't.
That's okay.
I'm kind of lost.
So the difference with the General Government Services Center, I guess it's more dependent upon what the use of the historic courthouse is. So if the board and county administration and legal and the clerk move to the historic courthouse, then you don't have to build square footage for them at the new General Government Services Center, but all of the other county administrative departments you do still have to build.
But then one of the goals is to bring everything together. Why would you separate? I mean,
Because we were at, the consultants were asked to look at that option, so that's option number 1. Option number 2
Okay.
is to move all of county administration, but it is to develop a county museum in the historic courthouse. And by doing so, we would move library administration over there and the history collection from the library.
I see it now. In option 2, I would have put all administrative departments first, and then library second. Below it, now I see it, because I can't get down. That just didn't make sense to me.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so everything in option 2 would go to the new general government services, and then the library and stuff goes
Into the historic courthouse. Yes. And then Board of Elections, so options 1 and 2 for Board of Elections can be mixed and matched with options 1 and 2 for,
Say what now, Miss?
options 1 and 2 for the Board of Elections can be mixed and matched with other ones, which is why we have them separated like this. So then the Jemb Courthouse, in both options, this is only judicial. So all the administrative departments move out to the new Government Services Campus and/or the historic courthouse, and this building becomes all judicial. No expansion to this, so the court's growth is limited to the footprints that the administrative departments currently hold in this building. And we looked at that and we worked on some master planning high level. That meant that there wasn't enough space for all of the judicial departments to function, including all of their future needs. So we looked at moving the guardian ad litem and the public defender potentially out of the building because there still wouldn't be space for them in this building.
I don't understand that. If we move out, they've got the building that they're space now, and two people are here. I mean, and their function is the courthouse. I mean, they've got to be at the courthouse. It doesn't make sense to move them.
Right.
So that's just option 1.
But you have to, but I guess the option, if you keep it here, you're going to add a 6th floor.
Correct.
Correct.
So that's option 2 is adding a 6th floor to this building, and then everyone fits and all the future needs are met. So we wanted to look at those two options for this building. Again, trying to show two options for everything. And the last building we looked at was child support. And so we decided they need to move out of their current building. And to meet their space needs, when we looked at, could you look at renovating space in the social services building for them, which would require further study. But there's a potential to renovate space in there that could be vacated for them to use in there. And then option 2 is to build a new building for child services.
Let me clarify option 1. At the Department of Social Services, the further study is depending on the pilot project with remote work. And so that's not been, I mentioned that in the budget process. So it really depends on the success of that project, because there's not current space available. It would have to be only through remote work.
And so option 2 is just, you're going to be building 2 buildings, I guess. You build the general services and you build a new standalone child.
Or option 3 is for them to stay exactly where they are in the Bradford building.
Would you be able to keep this building open to the public and stuff while constructing a 6th floor?
Yes. And part of it, so it's set up well, and we'll get into this when we go into the options further, but since the 5th floor up here is all administrative departments, there's no court judicial functions on the 5th floor, you'd have to build functions off of this floor, so build the new general government services building, or renovate the historic courthouse first, and then the 5th floor could be vacated, and then you can build the 6th floor.
I was just thinking about in terms of cranes and stuff like that, because there's a lot of people come in
It
both
would,
sides.
and some of the work would have to be done at night.
I'll tell you, Rick, they're doing it at the hospital, and they got the emergency room right there, and they're building on the top.
Yes,
It's a
but
way to do it.
They have a phasing, and later on in the slides, they share the phasing of this.
yes.
With these other, I'm sorry.
Oh, Commissioner Evans.
Quick question, though. I'm listening to all this, we're talking about moving this from this or doing all that. What about the current buildings that are currently occupied by these different departments? What are we doing with them?
So this is just the historic courthouse and the courthouse that we're in. It looked at Bradford. It doesn't look at all county functions, all county departments.
Oh, I thought all the county departments were going to new general services.
They are.
And that's what he's asking. So if veteran goes and all these other places goes, what happens to those buildings? That's what he was asking, I think.
Right.
Yes.
And we have, so a lot of those could be used for phasing if needed. They could be used for short-term, or they could be used in the next phase of overall countywide master planning. So once these departments vacate their current spaces, there'll be some swing space, or there'll be potentials for other departments if the sheriff needs more space, or anything like that. Those can be used in later phases. Right, it can be sold also.
Well, I hope that when planning on what you all are going to do with this, that some idea or something that will come in play with the process of what's going to happen with those, instead of waiting for a period of time to determine what's going to happen with those spots that are going to be empty.
Part of the disposition, though, Commissioner Evans, depends on which option you select. Because one option, we haven't gotten to it, if the board chose not to add a 6th floor, then one option is to move guardian ad litem to the Veteran Services Building. So that's why we haven't come to any conclusions. It truly depends on the options that you choose as far as the disposition of the buildings that are vacated.
So to summarize the options and some of the sequencing that would have to happen, which I think goes to your question a little bit with how do you keep the buildings operational. The first item that would have to happen in sequence in all of these is new government Services Center would have to be constructed so that you can begin to move departments currently in this building and the historic courthouse over there, have those buildings vacated so construction work could complete on them, and not have to worry about people being in the building as much while you're working on their spaces. So again, sequencing for option one, again, working on the new Government Services Center first. Those departments would vacate this building in the historic courthouse. You could then renovate the historic courthouse. So option one, I should add, option one is the one where admin moves to the historic courthouse. So that would also, you'd have to move development services out first into the new General Government Services Center. And then you would have to renovate the historic courthouse for admin and the board, and then move them over there. And then you could begin construction on this building. So there'd be, you'd have to do 3 different sequences before you could get to construction of this building. So new General Government Services Center, and then the historic courthouse, and then this building. And if you're looking at option 2, there's really only 2 big steps. So you have to build a new, but then since admin would be going to that department as well, everyone in this building in the administrative suites would be vacated at once, and then you could begin construction here probably earlier than if you had to wait for the completion of the historic courthouse to be finished. Does that make sense? Okay. So if we look at the new General Government Services Center, so it would have to be the first phase. So we have 2 options to share with you as well as 2 sites. And both can be mixed matched. You can do option 1 with site A or site B and vice versa. So we talked about our 2 options, which is dependent upon if administration goes to the General Government Services Center or the historic courthouse. And then our 2 sites are either, we're looking at the Crown Coliseum site, which is already county owned, so there wouldn't have to be site acquisition costs and some of the parking could be shared there. Or we could look at trying to find another parcel of land that would be closer to the downtown, but that could come with site acquisition costs and some more site development costs and potentially more parking costs.
So is the building going up, out, what? I mean, that would, you take what time?
Yes. So we'll share that with
Oh,
you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's okay.
I'm sorry. Go on.
That's it for that. So each of these there's 2 options and 2 sites, and we did pick one option to show on one site and one to show on the other, but they can be switched. So option 1 program, again, this is the one without administration and the board, going to the new Government Services Center. So right now you're in around 100,000 square feet of space. In this new Government Services Center, we would look to build around 140,000 square feet to accommodate all those future needs as well. Option 2, with the county administration moving to the new General Government Services Center, and right now you're in about 105,000 square feet, and we would look to build around 160,000 square feet. So there's around a 20,000 square foot difference of space being built at that campus, depending on which departments are going there. So again, we looked at the Crown Coliseum site as the first site. So this is an image from GIS site. So if we look over in that area, we can tell it's pretty flat. It's already cleared. The county already owns the land. So those are all good development signs over there. But over in this area over here, we do have some wetlands and topography, so we'd want to stay away from those areas.
Okay, so that's the front part, that's where you pointed, is that where the arena and the theater are?
Yes,
Yeah,
right there.
Okay.
Yes, and everything.
And the back part is the back part over there behind the Coliseum.
Yes, right. So everything highlighted in yellow is land already owned by the county. So there wouldn't be site acquisition costs in there. And then those same parcels, we looked at what the zoning was and how those would dictate the rules that we could use for what we could build. This area over here is currently zoned heavy industrial, but we could look at rezoning that if we wanted to put office space in there. But again, you can see that there's already plenty of parking spaces on this site that we could use dual use, since a lot of the items that are at the Coliseum and the auditorium and spaces like that happen at night. We could work to get an alternative parking plan done so we didn't have to build all those spaces. So we have shown option one on this site, it's the one that has less square footage since administration is not here. And we've shown this in 2 buildings to help create kind of this civic plaza, the civic square that opens up to Gillespie, but it's also pulled back so you don't have that heavy road noise, heavy traffic right at your front door. It creates this green space in front of the buildings, and then it also shields itself to all of the parking that's behind it. So it does help to create a bit of a civic plaza in green space in front of the building. So again, we've broken it down to 2 buildings, one of which would be more development service-based. So all of the items that are currently in the historic courthouse could go here, and you could have one floor for a one-stop shop for development services on the ground floor of one building, since that's a heavily trafficked area. And then the other building, you could have tax on the ground floor. We know that tax has a heavy population base coming to visit it, and sometimes they're not. We want to limit where the public is allowed in the building, so having them near the front door would be beneficial there. Again, there's almost 3,000 spaces already built in this area, so we don't have to recreate all of that parking. What we've shown here is we have a +5 spaces net gain from what's right now. So if we develop in an area, we would just want to make sure to replace whatever parking spaces we displaced. And then option 2, we have shown on a generic site. And the goal here, again, was to create a civic plaza or civic courtyard, and we've done this by creating 3 buildings. So you can have that enclosure and have that civic plaza that could open up to a road, have a bit of parking in front of the building, but the majority of parking we would place behind the building so that you did have that civic presence, civic campus up on the road that would be clearly visible and clearly identifiable. And what we've shown here too, we've shown Board of Elections on this site. If a large enough parcel of land was purchased, that could be a potential to go on this site here too. It wouldn't have to, but you would have to build all of the parking spaces that would be required for these buildings since they wouldn't be already provided. So in summary, for these options, we have some pros and cons, again, opportunities.
So just to make sure, so you didn't go up, you just went with 3 buildings, 3 separate buildings.
Correct. To create this sort of civic plaza, and that was one of our goals in both schemes, was to create some sort of civic space, civic gathering space that could be visible from the road. So we've done that with 3 buildings in this generic site, and on the Crown Coliseum, we've done it with 2 buildings.
But if you don't have a site the size of the Crown that's big enough, you may have to go up. So did you at least give an option 3 of going up with that building there or not there? Because, I mean, that's an option, is to go up.
Right. We don't have that shown drawn, but it could definitely be possible.
I mean, if you want to stay downtown, land's, we talked about this, land's going to be a premium wherever you go. So how much space, go to the next one, I think. So that whole corridor, I mean, that whole, what's the acreage? What's the land required to do all of that?
I believe.
That would be that would be, I would need to know that to be able to do an option other than
Right.
if you're talking about being downtown.
Right.
You have to know if there's enough space downtown to be able to do that.
Right, and I have that on the next couple slides. So what we have shown here, so for this generic area that is taken up, the Board of Elections is on here too, but if we take a generic rectangle around this space, it's about 20 acres.
20 acres.
Yes. So that's, and yes, there's ways you could shrink, limit renting up, like you said, but parking is going to be the biggest concern with amount of land needed. So if you have smaller, you're going to need to build parking garages, or if it's downtown, are there ways you can share parking with other spaces? So you can see here that the parking takes up the majority of the site. It's not necessarily the buildings.
And so, about this, Commissioner Keith on the line, I don't know if he wants to, I don't know how to ask him if he wants to ask a question or something, but Is there a chat or something?
I mean, he can hear you, you just need to unmute.
Okay. Commissioner Keith, you heard that if you wanted to ask a question, you can just, see, I knew he had a question over there. See? Go ahead. No, you got to unmute. There you go.
I don't really, this is just more informative today, correct?
We heard you.
Sir,
Now the manager's going to answer your question.
so Commissioner,
I am kind of curious, I did pick up on two things. First of all, were they given,
Wait a minute, you got that, wait a minute, say that again?
were they given each such as given a budget to work within, or was it do whatever you want and come back with whatever you desire? Do you know?
they are aware of with the funding that we have budgeted in the capital planning model. And so there are items in here that the board does not have to move forward with, such as the Board of Elections. The Board of Elections can stay in the space they have. They only added it to the campus as an option to have more of county services in one location, but it's just an option.
Sure, there's a lot of moving parts to this. I do have to, I want to follow up on Chairman Adams. And I heard the assistant manager say that it doesn't affect everybody, but ironically, every single department, it seems like, wanted more space. The only one that was cut was the Board of Commissioners and clerk. It's just doing a real quick look at the thing. So, I mean, I can't imagine there would be a space. We're good to go. Take some of ours. But we have to address the fact that people are going to be working remotely. And although not everyone can work remotely, more people will be working remotely than before the pandemic. So that was just my comment.
Okay. If you will mute, so, and then whenever we got you in the corner, I can see you. And any other commissioner that has anything. All right, I'm just going ahead.
Okay. So I know I showed these slides quickly, but then, so we did look at some costs and how this would affect the capital planning and what would need to be budgeted for this. So what we've done is broken it up into the two options. So if you have, the 140,000 square feet versus the 160,000 square feet, and these costs don't include any site acquisition costs, just since that's a variable and we want to be able to compare the two options. What are the two construction costs for the buildings, and site can be separate. So looking at this option that shows the two buildings, again, this could be on a generic site. If we had two buildings, if we're looking at around 140,000 square feet total, pure construction costs were around 250, but then once you add these factors, including, which is pretty high right now. So right now we have it escalated through Q1 of 2024, saying that's probably the earliest we could start construction. Past that, we have a line item in here for 1.5% per quarter past that. So if you wanted to work with this model and adjust the timeline, we can easily adjust that in here and share those numbers with you. But once you add all that up, you're looking at around 373.
Slow down, together. Go back.
Look at option one, which looks to me, wait a minute, I don't know, where are you?
This right here is the arena. And this is Gillespie I-95 business.
Okay, there are no references to historic courthouse there.
No.
No.
That's out there at the ground.
Okay, all of that is ground.
And then the next one is not necessarily next to the historic courthouse. It's a generic space of 20 acres or whatever acres you need, but it's not necessarily referencing any building right now. It's just, that's a model of what we could do.
Correct.
Quick question, and I'm probably way behind on this. But my concern is, we're talking the historic courthouse. said it would be used as a museum, correct?
In one option, yes.
One option. And what was that other option?
To place so the historic courtroom would become the boardroom, and then the Board of Commissioners' offices, meeting spaces, as well as county administration, the clerk, and legal would move into that building and occupy that.
Okay, now
And library administration would move into, in option one to the,
But I think that was the discussion began about the historic courthouse, it was to have our formal meetings there. And that was it, correct? And opposed to having offices for the board, as well as not having any other departments in there, right?
So we've provided options. One option is to use the historic courthouse for administration, legal, Board of Commissioners, and the meetings. Another option, because we've presented lots of options, is to have all of county administration with the other county departments instead of having them isolated in the historic courthouse. At the end of the day, it's the board's choice, but we've provided options.
Okay, yeah, I know about the options. I mean, I heard you, thank you. But I was just saying that the initial reason for looking at the historic courthouse, because that wasn't even in the plans a long time ago until it was brought up not too long ago, correct? Whenever we started talking about it, it's talking about funding. And when it was mentioned then that to use the courthouse, but the courthouse at that time was discussed to be used for our meetings,
For
right?
the chambers, I mean, for the,
Yeah, okay. That's what I was asking. The initial reason why we're looking at our courthouse. That's what I was asking.
Yes.
You understand that?
Yes, I do, yes.
Right, and we'll get to that after we finish up with this building. We'll move to the historic courthouse next. And again, wanted to show two options. So one of them looks at what you just said, and the other looks at the library administration and the museum, in case county administration wanted to be with everyone else at the General Government Services Center, just so that the historic courthouse wasn't laying empty, and we answer the question of what happens with that building when we're looking at the master planning. Does that answer your question?
I don't know. I'm hearing a muddled situation. Where is the historic courthouse in here that has to be emptied and
And then renovated?
Renovated, which would be expensive?
Correct.
I didn't know we had decided on that.
That would maybe good just to go ahead and jump.
Skip ahead to that? Okay.
She's going to try to answer the question.
We have those in a couple slides.
I keep going.
Okay. So the historic courthouse, to answer your questions, again, we have the two options of county admin or library admin and museum. And what we did with this building, we also performed a facilities conditions assessment. So since the historic courthouse is pretty old, we know that it's in rough shape in places. We went ahead and did the facility conditions assessment to figure out what all it would take to bring it up to today's standards, make it in, the historic courtroom into a modern meeting space that could have the technology and ADA requirements to turn that into, does that? Question.
We're trying to find a way to utilize the historic courthouse.
And it sounds like it's becoming more and more difficult, because what I just heard Commissioner Council ask about, and what I heard the response was about the modern technology, if you want to use it for business, it'd be difficult, because you wouldn't have the technology needed to go into that building.
and I think the museum part, if you ever been upstairs to the gym, it's beautiful. Well, now, if you were up there on the top,
Oh, no, I never been to that jail, that one over
no,
there, yeah.
this one over there. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So some of our initial assessments, I mean, we know there's ADA upgrades that are going to need to be done to the building regardless of use. But we also looked at kind of the structure of the building and how that would depend on what use the building has, as well as some of the and so right now, since the building's used for development services, it's a business-type occupancy. It's used for offices and floor loads outside of the historic courthouse, or outside of the historic courtroom, are currently designed to be loaded for office use. So,
can I ask you, so, courthouse, right, it's grandfather done that, right?
In terms of the.
Because it's not, with the ADA and everything?
The amount of this renovation would require us to bring it up.
Right, so once you start, we're gonna be like we are at the theater. In terms of the cost of what it costs to do that, as opposed to doing some of the minor stuff. If you do major renovations, we can get in the same situation. You gotta have it in the theater. I'm just trying to, that's right. I think that needs to be on the table. I think that's important to know, even if you talk about all of this stuff, is the cost. Because what we found out from the theater is what it would cost to rebuild it and what was the cost to make it ADA. And it just was, before you even get into doing all of this stuff, is if you got to go full ADA, what's that cost?
yes,
Do you have that cost?
yes.
That's the cost. Then we just get to that point, right? We can come back to this, but to make it fully ADA, what's that cost?
I'm going to add, so we looked at, if we're looking at museum and business, so one of them, you have to bring the building up to a business occupancy standard. If we're looking at turning the building into a museum, you have to bring it up to an assembly occupancy standard. So there's some different standards that you have to bring it up to based on the use. So we've priced both of those. And if you're at an assembly occupancy, there's some higher requirements that are required. So the floor loads have to be more for assembly spaces. And even if it is used for an office building, so if we had the boardroom you would still want a closed session space, a meeting space outside of that. So we'd have to reinforce certain spaces to bring them up to assembly load and reinforce those floors, but not as much square footage as if you turned into a museum, or if the library brings over some of their archive space and other items that are heavy storage items, all of that floor would also have to be reinforced. And then the other items, so if you go to an assembly occupancy, you would be required to sprinkler the building, to add a sprinkler system to the building, which is still recommended, even if it's a building occupancy, or a business occupancy. But I don't think it would be required. The other thing we looked at, again, was life safety and where the stairs are located and distances and how that affects the amount of people and loads and distances to those stairs. And if the building stays as it is, and it's business occupancy with offices, and you don't sprinkler the building, you are not allowed to occupy the fourth floor. So the jail would basically have to be similar to what it is now, it's not used. Unless, again, you wanted to spend the money to add another stairway, which is expensive, and you wanted to sprinkler the building. For a museum, you would be required to sprinkler the building, so you would already have that. But you don't have the stairs you need still to occupy the whole fourth floor. So you would still have to build that second stairway out of the fourth floor if you wanted the public to be able to go up to the fourth floor of the jail. So that's another added expense. But you could have the museum and the jail and just have only a portion of the fourth floor occupied. So the public might not be able to get into some of the far cells, but they could see those cells that are right around the existing stairwell. Does that make sense?
It makes sense.
Yeah, it's just a lot.
It is.
That's what we're saying.
Do you want me to go to the... So if you have questions on the layouts, we do have those.
You're not on the screen, but we can hear you. Now you're on the screen.
Okay. Can you go back to last slide? Excuse me if you said this, I'm having a lot of difficulty understanding everything that's being said. But what I hear is, if it maintains itself as a museum or a historical structure, we do not have to do all these upgrades. But if we do make it into any sort of office area where the public can be involved in, we'd have to make every one of these upgrades. Is that what you said?
It's actually opposite. So if it becomes a museum, museums are considered an assembly occupancy, and so then you would have to build bring the building up to a higher standard than if it's an office occupancy.
But even with maintaining the historical nature of it?
Yes, because the structure and life safety requirements don't go away with the historic aspect of the building.
Okay, well, there would be a lot of work that would have to be done, especially on the third and fourth floor up there.
Yes.
The mechanical systems are in the middle of offices and bathrooms, so,
Correct.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
So I'm going to scroll past these slides, and if you have questions about exact layouts, we can go back to them. But if we look at costs, minimize that. So option one, so again, if it stays an office building, we're looking at pure renovation costs for that. So this does include bring it up to an office standard total. And again, based on all of the sequencing and everything that would have to be done first, we've said, well, it couldn't be in the first quarter of 2024. It would at least need to be 2.5 years after that. So we've added a good amount of escalation here. So almost closer to $2 million in escalation costs. And total construction costs then comes up to almost $12 million. And then you'd have soft costs on top of that, which are typically around 30%, bringing you to a total project cost of around $15.5 million for that. And over here on the side, we have some optional items that aren't necessarily included in these numbers, but if sprinkler the building, again, it would be optional. And this option, that's an additional about $500,000. And these numbers shown, I should say, are all in total number costs. You don't have to add factors onto them. If the county wanted to look at opening up any of the skylights, so the building originally had skylights over the courtroom as well as the stairwell that have since been blocked off, and there's some mechanical units on those and items like that. So if the county did want to look at, bringing the building up to, or I should say back to its original condition, there would be some additional costs associated with that. Right now, that building had a balcony originally in the courtroom that has since been turned into offices. So if the county wanted to bring that back and bring the courtroom to its original condition, you're looking at adding almost $500,000 there. If you wanted to add that second exit to the fourth floor, it's expensive. So that's almost $2.5 million if that was something the county wanted to look at. And then we also looked at, if some of the mechanical systems want to be rerouted so all of those windows can be opened up and remove the boards that are around them. We're looking at another around $1 million there.
What year was this building built? Do anybody know?
It's 1920 something.
No, it says 1923.
Yeah.
It was in 1923?
So this is what would be required. These are all optional that you can add on to that. Looking at the museum, so the assembly occupancy, we're at about $3 million more. So this previous one, this was about 15.5, this is about 18.5 of required upgrades. And again, you have these same optional upgrades on it that you can add on to that if you'd like. And then we've added in the new General Government Services Center with the historic courthouse, so put those costs in here together. So option one would be about $83.5 million. And these numbers don't include any site acquisition costs, and they don't include any of those optional numbers that we saw in the previous slide.
Either one, well, option one, you don't, inside, you own it already.
Right, yes.
Right.
And option two, we don't have any site costs added in case you wanted
Right.
this building program to go on the Crown site, just so we're comparing apples to apples there. And the historic courthouse renovation cost, again, doesn't include opening up the skylights or any of those optional costs. But we're at about $83.5 million compared to $95.5 million. So about $12 million difference in the two options, with the museum being more expensive.
But if you wait on the historic courthouse renovations and some of it, you're only about 10 million apart, less than 10 million apart.
Right.
Without the land acquisition.
Correct. So if you wanted all of the administrative departments to go in the new general government services building or complex, however you want to look at it, it's about $10 million different there. And then the historic courthouse function is another piece on top of that.
That we're talking about.
Okay. And then we've added in, library administration, if they don't go in the historic courthouse, does something need to be done at the library? So they have more space, which would be a further study there. And if they do go into the historic courthouse, then the library has some expansion space at the HQ library for them to expand into there. And then Board of Elections, also if you build it on the campus, we're looking at around $15 million there. And that does include if that building's being built 10 years out. So that cost could be saved if it was renovated instead of built new.
That's what she was talking about. I guess his question, so that people don't think we just over here whispering, is that everybody, if we do the new general government services, all the employees from over there would move to the new general services building. Then he said, what happens to that if we take that option?
To the historic courthouse?
Yes.
So I guess that depends on whether you would want to use it as a museum and move some of the library programming over there, or there's another use for it.
Okay, just for point of clarity, Mr. Chairman, please, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
And I really do want to understand this. So if you spend X number of dollars, millions of dollars, to renovate the courthouse, it has to be done in a manner where the occupancy by people that are visiting will be able to go in safely and stay there. Okay. I haven't heard, which you probably see it at IDE, if it's not used as a museum, and you just use it, is there any change that's going to have to be made for people like me going up in there? That's going to be quite a bit, it's going to be extensive as well, correct?
So and Mike might be able to answer this better than me, but if you're in it right now and you're not adding any storage load, you're not moving any walls, you're not updating any finishes, you're keeping the mechanical systems as they are, you're not upgrading any of the ADA, you can still go in there.
You can still go in there, but would it
Go in there safely right now.
Oh, I'm sorry. But would it be enough? Would it be intact enough to continue to have? That's what nobody is there though.
So Commissioner Evans, I think we probably need to go back to very early discussions, as you might recall, that even if we don't make it ready for an assembly, there's a lot of work that needs to be done to the historic courthouse. Let's just say you keep everyone in there that's in there today, but the customer flow is not amenable. First of all, we need to make it ADA accessible. There's the restroom and the plumbing needs to be updated. If we just kept everyone in there, we still need to do a lot of work. They haven't explored that option, and it may not be 15 million or 18 million, but it's going to be expensive. I believe somewhere around 12 million was thrown out just to keep the same people in there in the same offices, but to do the needed renovations. Does that help?
Yes, it does. Because initially, going back, I do remember those conversations.
Yes, sir.
And initially, Commissioner Stewart had toured the area.
Yes, sir.
And was complaining about how bad it was for our employees to be there. So that's how we got to this discussion today.
Yes, sir.
And so, that's my concern.
Well, my question would be, is that you can't know that. If you moved everybody to the new general services building, the first question you have to ask is, what do you want to use it for? Because that's going to dictate what you do to it. I mean, that's a question that hadn't even been answered. If we decide on that option that everybody goes to take them and everybody to the new center is empty, what do you want to put in there? And that will drive your cost.
Correct.
And it doesn't have to be a museum, it doesn't have to necessarily be an office. Like some people still go over there from the state just to have hearings in the courtroom. And so it's according to what usage you want out of the historic courthouse.
Right. And there's laws if you touch a certain percentage of the building,
Right.
you have to upgrade ADA and
That's right.
And the more,
That was my question.
right, the more of the building you touch, the more you're required to bring it up to today's standards.
It's a bigger structure.
And that's,
It is.
Outside, yeah, up there where the pictures are. That's not further up, but right where the pictures are hanging on the wall. It's beautiful. It's there.
Okay. And then to answer one of your previous questions about what do we do with the space that's vacated, here we have a list of the spaces that would be vacated, that would be outside of the historic courthouse and the Jemb Courthouse. If we looked at these options, so again, the Veteran Services Building, which we stated earlier, would be vacated. We could find a use or sell that building. You'd have some IT space in the DSS and public health buildings, so there would be some additional space available in those buildings. You would also have some IT and PIO space in the library that could be expanded into. Those are both pretty small suites. And you also have, 226 Bradford Avenue, so if PIO moved into the new government building, their current suite would be vacated. And then again, we looked at 223 Hull Road as a potential for swing space if that's needed during construction. And any of these suites could also be used as swing space if needed. We did look again at Winding Creek Annex, where community development is in right now, but we understand that not to be a county-owned building, so we don't want to plan for any long-term county department building.
We have it for 95 more years.
We do, okay.
Yes.
And I believe that's a couple, 2,000 to 4,000 square feet of space in there.
Will they have some commissioners here then?
Cool be these.
Oh, no, God, it's good.
And I'm going to let Jim speak about the Jemb Courthouse.
Hey, thanks, Mary. Well, we're on to the Jemb Courthouse, and it's roughly almost two-thirds of the total space that's in question, so it's a big parcel project. With a number of options, and we settled down on really two basic ones that are pretty straightforward. One is you don't add anything to the building. You let the building flush out with the folks that are in it, but everybody doesn't fit. And Commissioner, to your question earlier, when I started the project, I had the same impression that everything should fit once the fifth floor is vacated and pockets of the ground floor are vacated. And they do more or less for the current space they have now. But we are tasked with doing a long-range space need. And when you start to grow the courts over the next 20 years, that's when you start to have constraints in terms of everybody not fitting in. And those two departments that were targeted that could potentially move out of the building were guardian ad litem and the public defender under option one. Yes, sir.
Can I would ask that, does this contemplate that the registered deeds comes to the new government, the general service?
Yes. Yes, yes, in all cases. And so option one, there were no additions to the building with the exception, and you see this asterisk right here. We are recommending that in both cases, a modest front vestibule, the front vestibule is expanded on the existing building to make the entry check-in more secure for people coming into the building. So, but that's a pretty modest addition. Option number two would be adding a sixth floor onto the building. And while it doesn't completely get to the total square footage, we have done test fits and it does work. And it's very efficient, and that allows everybody to stay in the building, which the court has expressed that's their preference, as you can imagine.
Let me ask you a question, because if we move out and all the employees move out, you don't need as much parking. You got the front parking and you got this parking. You could build a small building for the public defender and the guardian ad litem right next to the building that touches, and you can come in to the side.
Well, as soon as you add square footage, and we've had discussions with the city about that, they may even require additional parking for the sixth floor addition.
Well, I'm saying not do the sixth floor, because according to what the cost is to do the sixth floor, And what Rick was talking about with the cranes, is it somewhat just as easy to then look at building in one of these parking lots, small or whatever?
That's
a building.
That's a great question.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
you gotta figure out what's the cost for that sixth floor as opposed to, if you're just talking about those two, things,
That's a great question, and we have we've looked at that in the costing of both options. We're not just wishing away those departments. We know that there's got to be money invested. They've got to either be moved into an existing. So when we get to the costing, we'll show you how those numbers shake out. And it's pretty interesting analysis. So just overall, real quickly, I mean, the building's in pretty good condition given its age. The county Department of General Services folks should be commended on how well they keep the facility up. It's really holding up pretty well. But some functional things are there's current courts are currently short courtrooms. The clerks is split on a number of floors, so there's some operational challenges that need to be addressed. And again, additional square footage may trigger a need to upgrade parking. And even the vertical expansion may require approval from the city, but in preliminary discussions with them, I don't think that would be an issue due to height.
Are you?
Commissioner Council.
Flip back, please. Okay, then we'll maintain, okay. Good usage of the present courtrooms. Anywhere so that we can see how much they are being used?
In terms of percentage of time they're occupied, is that what you're saying?
What?
Yes, that's what she's talking about.
Yeah.
They are
And whether
not.
they need any more space, if you're not using the ones you already have, I guess that's a question.
Well, it's a valid question. The courts would probably have to weigh in on that.
The courts.
Yeah.
They're never
Court,
had enough.
no courthouse has courtrooms that are occupied 8 hours a day. They don't work that way. They tend to have a certain percentage of what we call dark time, where the court is not being held in it. But it doesn't mean they don't need the courtroom.
Okay.
But we can try to answer that question.
And I don't understand.
But we can try to answer that question more clearly if that some skepticism.
Okay. But I guess it's not politically expedient for me to ask any more questions.
No, you're allowed to ask all the questions you want. If I can't answer them, I'll tell you I can't answer them. I will try to get information back to you, okay?
Okay.
I'm not going to make something up. The current square footage, you can see the numbers there, about 212,000 square feet. Their current proposed, and again, this would probably fit within the building if there's no growth planned, but then once you apply growth onto it, you can see we get to a larger number. In fact, that number is bigger than the courthouse, even with the sixth floor, but we've tested it, and we can get everybody in it well enough, if you will. I don't know if you want to go through floor by floor on what's each floor, but just to prove to you that we did test it and that it's all in there, okay? So there's option 2. And again, the basic difference is option 2 has everybody in, option 1 has guardian ad litem and the public defender out. So kind of a summary. Option 1, the opportunity is no major site costs, that's large, but then, you do have to pay to get guardian ad litem and public defender somewhere else in the building. And to the points discussed on the historic courthouse apply here as well. ADA upgrades will be required. This building, while it is newer, was still built before really the major ADA current code improvements were passed. So that's going to be a challenge for this building as well. Sixth floor. While we're adding a floor to the building is a challenge, we get a vacant floor because everything on this floor moves out, and we can kind of systematically go down floor by floor and renovate the building. It won't be easy, but it can be done, and it's certainly a lot cheaper than looking at building a new building. So the courts are understanding that it's something they'll have to live through. And then the big unknown really on the option 2 is what's the city going to require for parking? We had some preliminary discussions with them on that. There seems to be adequate parking, but they have their code of 1 car per 300, which would say you need about 100 more cars if you add additional to the top of the building. But I think there could be discussions with the city about, keep the courts downtown and maintain that presence, that maybe they'd be flexible on that. So cost comparisons. This is the renovation cost to this building. And you can read that number. It's basically $32 million. That would be what to renovate this building without putting an addition onto it. But to your point earlier, we still have to deal with the guardian ad litem. We still have to deal with the public defender. So we looked at that. The guardian ad litem neatly fits into the veterans building, so that works pretty well. And the cost of renovating that building, we anticipate to be about $1 million. However, the public defender is a little bit more of a challenge. You could move it into existing space at a cost of about $3 million, or you could build a new building at a cost of about $8 million. The challenge of finding existing space is we were unable, in the course of our study, to come up with an appropriate existing building that they could move into. So to be safe for our pricing of the project, we assume you're probably looking to have to build a building for the public defender.
Well, I mean, and not necessarily for the public defender. I mean, I guess the option would be you could build you could actually build the courtrooms over there. I mean, it doesn't, if you build another building, it's whatever you put in it. It doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the public defender. You can leave them on their floor, and you can put juvenile services over there, and you use those courtrooms or whatever. So
Yeah.
I guess the question would be on a building, how much square footage would you need for another building? Because if you're talking about the renovation of, again, that 6th floor, the cost is maybe cheaper to build the building somewhere right next to here. Because, at one point, we talked about building the general services building in the parking lot right next where the 2-hour parking lot is and have a walkway over.
Yeah.
We talked about that. So.
Yeah, let us keep going, because we do show that analysis. We're assuming that, and your point's well taken. I mean, the square footage delta would be have to be built, and it's going to cost you roughly about $8 million no matter what you put into it. Okay, so you have to add that on to the cost of renovating this building. And what's really interesting is, let's look at the 6th floor addition. That ends up being $39 million to add this floor on and renovate this. When you compare that to the 2, option 1, no addition, and option 2, 6th floor addition, when you add in that new construction for the public defender building, and it's actually more, it's $42 million total project cost versus getting everybody in this building for about $40 million. It's about $2 million delta. Now, one could say that when we're talking big, broad planning numbers like this, $2 million is probably a bit of a swing. It could be the same cost, but it's certainly not less expensive.
Well, by the time you do all the costs and stuff, it gets to be, and I think when Dr. King was with us, said sometimes instead of just trying to renovate, it's just build new, it's quicker, easy to trace. We kind of found that out on some of that stuff. Just easy to build, something new and meet the new standards.
Yeah, and in this case, they're building up.
The 6th floor additions, does that include wall space, everything?
Yes, sir.
And everything that has to go into it?
Yeah, that's fully fit out. So, again, we're showing about a $2 million delta, but I would say that what you're looking at is more or less a wash.
Yeah, it's $7 million for a 6th floor addition, or $8 million for a new building.
Yeah.
Right. Because you have all the inconvenience of doing the 6th floor with the cranes and everything.
Well, it's still going to be disruptive building anything on this site.
Yes,
Right.
it would be, but it's
And-
for $1 million,
Yeah.
I'm talking about
And you're-
trying to retrofit something.
Well, when you're done with this, this building would operate like a new building. It would work well.
There's issues here, but I'm just talking about the 6th floor addition.
Yeah, there's-
everything that you've already got on top of it.
Yeah, there would be operational inefficiencies because everybody wouldn't be in one building. And also you have people moving back and forth, the staff mostly moving back and forth between the two buildings and maybe you could put a bridge in to connect it, but they'd have to go get checked in through security every time they come in and come out. The court's preference
You know
was,
what, they got a swipe card, they don't even go through security.
yeah,
So, I don't know about that.
okay.
But you know, sometimes I think that we as a board have to be bold. We have to be bold and take some bold measures. And piecemealing all the time just doesn't work. Because and this is just me saying this, just doing the renovations and adding on the sixth floor, all you can do is make it a situation to be worse than what it is. And what I mean by worse is it's time consuming. You relocating this group of people to one place so that they can get in and do this and do that. Hey, just build the building.
Well, in either scenario, though, you're renovating this building. What you're talking about is going down the street and building a new building, which we didn't look at. We could quickly run those numbers, but I think you'd be floored by how expensive that would be. Cost of a current new courthouse right now, because of escalation, is probably pushing $700 a square foot. So renovating what you got, while it may be painful, is going to be a way more cost-prudent decision than trying to walk away from this thing. And so you're kind of tethered to this building to start with. And because of that, you want to make the best of it that you can. And putting everybody under one roof is the best long-term solution, both functionally and from a security standpoint.
I guess the other options is to move them out and lease them.
You folks would only fill about a half of this building. And then you'd be building at $800, $700 a square foot, and you're building down the street. So we looked at that. I mean, we looked at that scenario. Yeah, but you folks don't have nearly enough administrative space to put a dent in this building. Good.
Right here, that's fine. Move it on, because it's simple.
Yes? Well, I'm going to put Natalie back up here again.
She said she's not going back up there, look at this.
We're almost done, I promise. So just a couple last slides on child support. So again, either we can look at vacating space in the social services building through remote working initiatives, which would take some further study to move child support into the social services building, or we could look at building a new building for them near the human services campus. So on the screen here, you'll see the Human Services Campus. What you have built right now is in orange, but you also own the parcel at the bottom in blue, which is where we would look at building the new building at, if that's the way the county decided to go. And that would fit into that triangle-shaped site, something like this. So you could build a two-story building there with all of the required parking for child support, again, on that campus, if that's what you decided to do, if there wasn't space available to renovate. And if we look at the cost comparisons between the two, so if you renovate space, we're looking at, and this would be currently we have this as quite a few years out.
Can you go back, I'm just trying to see where that little blue, where's Martin Luther King? So it sits in that little, I guess where the billboard is, I guess? Where the billboard is?
For the homeless people there.
The billboard is down further in the intersection. Well, there's one on Ramsey Street, you're right, maybe.
It's right there by, yeah, because I'm seeing where the lane goes up to go, okay.
You know where you turn in to DSS?
Uh-huh.
That piece of property is right there, because there's the
This is the turn-in right here.
turn in.
There's some kind of structure already on that building.
There's a telephone.
It's a small utility
Yeah.
building that we could either move or build around.
Okay, I know, okay. I know where you're from. Thank you.
You're welcome. So again, if we look at renovating a building, so we have this dated at, quite a ways out, around 10 years out. If you build it sooner, it's going to be cheaper, but for comparison purposes, we've shown it quite a ways out. So we have this at about $5.7 million for renovation, and a new building for them. Just a quick comparison of those two numbers. And then we have our overall option summaries that kind of summarize all of the costs that we've looked at. And again, we have these broken up so you can kind of pick and choose different options together. So all of the general government services and historic courthouse items that we looked at are at the top, so either 83 versus 95 million. The projects for the Jemb Courthouse, so either renovating or adding new, are on these line items. So you have the 42 million versus 39 million. And then we have the miscellaneous projects on the bottom, so child support if you're renovating versus building new, and we have the new Board of Elections listed in here as well. If there's any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Commissioner Lancaster? Commissioner Council? Commissioner Stewart?
No.
Commissioner Evans? Commissioner Keith? No questions? Okay. So Madam Minister, that is a lot of information to be able to do at one time with some questions. I know that there is some things to be able to move on, but I think that it would probably be a little bit better if commissioners could dissect some of this. If they have some questions, just direct them to you to get to the consultants to be able to do, and then go from there.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
I do have a question.
Yes, Commissioner Keith.
Yeah, to the manager, what is our availability of budgeting for in our capital plan?
So Commissioner Keith, I'm asking,
And I guess the pressure points for the commissioners as we go and think about this direction to the managers, one is with the general services building, that everybody move, all of the county departments move into the general services building and not into the historic courthouse, but there will be some renovations to the historic courthouse, but you got to do that. And then as you do the renovations, it's whether to do the sixth floor or possibly do another building. I guess you have some issues with both in terms of the city and that construction going up or whatever on that. That's kind of odd since they built it. When they built it with the possibility of adding that sixth floor way back when. So I tell them I'm grandfathered under because they did that a long time ago. But that would be an issue. So as you think about it from the commissioner standpoint, I think those are some of the pressure points that we have. The cost is the cost, and I don't think many of the options in terms of where you go. It's whether we all want to be together. And I think with that, from my standpoint, it's a much better for all county departments to be together and to be able to do that. So, anybody have any other questions, comments? If not, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn. Second.
Then moved and second, all those in favor of the roll call?
Mr. Lancaster,
Yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Cowell, Commissioner Stewart,
Yes.
Chairman Adams,
Yes.